So my constituents in North Carolina, they support law enforcement and they want safer communities. Many live, work, and raise their families in those rural communities. Bridging the digital divide and getting access to every American has long been a bipartisan interest and an important job for the FCC. In written congressional testimony, you claim that, quote, policymakers have focused disproportionately on broadband deployment in rural areas, end quote. Residents of North Carolina know that improving internet access in rural areas keeps these smaller communities thriving. We need an FCC that's focused on bridging the digital divide in North Carolina and prioritizing the economic and educational benefits of better broadband. It's also concerning that law enforcement groups like the National Sheriff's Association and the Fraternal Order of Police oppose your nomination. You're listed as a board member of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, EFF, and since your nomination, you've tried to minimize the significance of your board seat, but being a board member is no small thing. EFF has called you a close collaborator for nearly 20 years. You've donated to them and made public calls for others to donate to EFF. In a letter to this committee, the Fraternal Order of Police stated that you have an anti-police bias and refused to disavow many extreme positions from EFF. In the summer of 2020, as rioters burned businesses across the country, EFF encouraged folks to go to the streets, even publishing a memo on how to thwart law enforcement investigations, suggesting people buy a prepaid disposable phone and dress for anonymity. Now, Chair, I'd like to submit this to the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. Now, the FCC and law enforcement, they work together a lot, as we know. And as you know, the FCC makes sure that law enforcement alerts are delivered over communications networks and that those networks can comply with court orders to aid in law enforcement investigations. Your deep association with the anti-law enforcement views of the EFF leads me to believe that your confirmation would, as the Fraternal Order of Police wrote, quote, show a complete disregard for the hardworking men and women of law enforcement, end quote. Ms. Sohn, you've taken to social media to express your anti-police bias, for example. You have retweeted and liked statements supporting defund the police. You've also retweeted a statement referring to federal law enforcement officers responding to riots in 2020 as, quote, armed goons in riot gear with tear gas, end quote, as Senator Cruz mentioned in his opening remarks. Ms. Sohn, given your demonstrated anti-police bias, do you understand why law enforcement officers don't trust you to look out for their best interest, especially if you help lead an agency that's a critical partner of law enforcement? Yes or no?
Senator,
and just simply yes or no, please.
Could you repeat the question, because I kind of lost it?
Yeah, the question's really based on your understanding of why law enforcement's concerned. I mean, do you understand why law enforcement has concern, yes or no?
No, I don't, actually.
You actually don't. Okay, so that's actually
I'm very
telling
surprised.
Thank you. I do want to reclaim my time here. So, I mean, it's obvious why they would be concerned with these tweets and retweets and the things that you would support. But Ms. Sohn, the EFF published a guide called Attending a Protest that tells people to wear a mask. It will protect you from being identified in photos of the protest. Ms. Sohn, does encouraging folks to hide their identity during violent situations make law enforcement's job easier? Yes or no, simply?
I don't consider protests necessarily violent, sir. Look, I don't make policy.
Well, during violent situations, as we saw in 2020, do you understand why law enforcement would have a concern with you suggesting that people enhance their anonymity? Yes or no?
I understand why people might not want to be surveilled. I understand that. But I had nothing to do with...
So I was hoping for a yes or no that you could actually understand law enforcement's concern.
I understand, I absolutely understand.
So you do understand
yes.
law enforcement's concern. Thank you.
I do, yes.
Ms. Sohn, you know, we can learn a lot by who a person associates with, and you've been associated with a lot of radical partisans. You're an EFF board member and have received support from a group, 18 Million Rising, which has said, quote, policing has never been an effective response to violence because police are agents of white supremacy, end quote. The FCC needs impartial leadership, and unfortunately, I don't believe that you offer that. I fear that your confirmation would make it harder for law enforcement to protect North Carolinians and make it harder for my state's many rural communities to get desperately needed broadband. I urge all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to oppose your nomination. And again, thank you for being here. I yield back.